In recent years, countries like the UK, France, and Russia have all tried to equip their naval vessels with attack helicopters. But when it comes to the US, things are a little different. The US Army has its iconic helicopters like the MH-6 Little Bird and AH-64 Apache. On the Navy side, they've developed a whole series of helicopters that evolved from the Stallion. It's almost like they never even considered putting the Army's top-tier helicopters on Navy ships. But here's the twist. The US Navy actually did consider using Army helicopters on their ships. Back in the 1980s, there was even a plan to get the Apache attack helicopter on Navy ships. This was known as the Sea Apache project. Today, let's dive into this project and the history behind it. So, why would it be beneficial for the Army's attack helicopters to be used on Navy ships? Well, for one, it's all about versatility. If the Army and Navy were to use the same type of helicopter, it could really boost the overall interoperability between the services. From training to spare parts and manufacturing, this could save a ton of money and reduce the time spent on training. But here's the question. If it was such a good idea, why didn't the US Navy actually use the Apache? To understand that, we need to go all the way back to 1972, when the Army's AH-64 Cheyenne attack helicopter program was canceled. Now, even today, the AH-64 Cheyenne specs are impressive, but it had one major flaw, being too advanced. The U.S. Air Force, which typically controls air combat operations, didn't want the Army to develop complex combat aircraft, like the Cheyenne, because it would infringe on their domain. On the flip side, the Army was frustrated with the Air Force's slow response times, especially when it came to close air support. They argued that by the time the Air Force's aircraft arrived, the soldiers on the ground were often already in grave danger. The 1948 Key West Agreement stipulated that the Army couldn't have fixed-wing aircraft, and although the Cheyenne was a helicopter, its design was too similar to a fixed-wing aircraft. The Air Force saw the Cheyenne's speed and weaponry as a threat to its control, and they challenged it all the way to the Pentagon. Ultimately, the Army had to cancel the Cheyenne and agreed to let the Air Force's A-10 and the Marine Corps' AV-8A Harrier take on the ground attack role. However, the Army kept the rights to develop rotorcraft, and after the A-10 and Harrier entered service, the Army sought a helicopter specifically for anti-armor missions. But this time, they made it clear they wanted it to be an Army asset controlled entirely by the Army. By the end of 1972, the Army released a request for proposals for the Advanced Attack Helicopter Program, making it one of their top 5 priorities. In 1976, Hughes Aircraft's AH-64 won the contract and was soon developed into the iconic AH-64 Apache, one of the most legendary attack helicopters of all time. Fast forward 48 years, and Boeing still produces 82 AH-64E every year. Clearly, the Apache has proven its worth and remains ahead of its time. So, it's no surprise that the Navy and Marine Corps wanted a piece of the action. At the time, the Marine Corps was using the AH-1J Sea Cobra, which had a max takeoff weight of under 6 tons, 4 tons lighter than the Apache. The Sea Cobra couldn't match the Apache in terms of payload or endurance, and the Apache was decked out with the latest tech, including a laser rangefinder, forward-looking infrared system, and specialized targeting optics, features the Sea Cobra lacked. As soon as the Apache entered service with the Army, the Marine Corps reached out to Hughes Aircraft, hoping to adapt the Apache for naval use to replace the Sea Cobra. And that's when the Sea Apache project began. But why did the Sea Apache, with all its potential, never make it into Navy or Marine Corps service? Let's take a closer look at this ambitious project and what happened next. The Sea Apache, also known as Gray Thunder, was designed primarily for smaller Navy vessels. The idea was to make it a versatile helicopter that could also operate from amphibious assault ships to provide air support for the Marines. Since these fleets were often far from the protection of aircraft carriers, the Sea Apache was envisioned as a temporary air defense platform, capable of carrying short-range air-to-air missiles to defend smaller fleets. In 1984, after Hughes Helicopter became part of McDonnell Douglas, they began conducting a series of studies on how the Apache could be adapted for naval use based on the Navy and Marine Corps' needs. As the Sea Apache project evolved, it went through several modifications to meet specific requirements. Engineers started with the Army's AH-64 Apache and came up with 3 different versions of the Sea Apache. All versions kept the same engine, the General Electric T-700, which was used in the original AH-64A. However, these Navy versions incorporated a few key changes: anti-corrosion treatments for maritime operations, improved electromagnetic interference protection, upgraded pulse Doppler navigation systems, additional tie-down points, and an automatic rotor folding system to fit into the lamp's hangers. Now, let's break down each version. The first version of the Sea Apache was essentially the AH-64A with a few modifications. It had a folding tail boom, a radar mounted on top of the main rotor for air-to-ground and air-to-air searches, and it was adapted to carry Harpoon and Sidewinder missiles. But as the project moved forward, some problems with this design became apparent. The main landing gear was too narrow, which made the Apache unstable when operating on the smaller decks of naval ships. The sea's unpredictable waves, combined with the narrow landing gear, posed a real risk of the helicopter tipping over during operations. To fix this, engineers at McDonnell Douglas redesigned the main landing gear, moving it to the tip of the short wings, which also allowed it to fold up into the wings themselves, reducing drag. Next came the second version of the Sea Apache. In this design, Hughes engineers removed the air search radar from the top of the main rotor and placed it inside the nose. To make space for the radar, the 30mm chain gun mounted underneath the nose was removed. The Apache's nose was also reworked, elongating the side pontoons, which allowed for extra space for electronics and fuel. The short wing mounts now had the ability to carry 2 AIM-9L Sidewinder missiles. Finally, the third version of the Sea Apache made even more significant changes. It removed the side pontoons and added a larger radar dome on the nose to accommodate the APG-65 radar, essentially the same radar used on the FA-18 Hornet. This radar supported 16 different air-to-ground scanning modes and could track 10 targets while engaging 8 of them. It had a maximum search range of 300 kilometers. After these changes, the Sea Apache started to look less like the original Apache and more like a specialized naval platform. The Navy's performance goals for the Sea Apache included a 370 kilometers mission radius and a 4-hour loiter time. After these 3 versions were submitted to the U.S. Navy and Marine Corps for review, things quickly got heated between the 2 branches. The Navy was particularly interested in the third version with the APG-65 radar, but the Marine Corps didn't agree. While the APG-65 was advanced, it didn't fit the Marine Corps' needs. The Marines wanted to retain the Apache's forward-looking infrared system and night vision capabilities, as well as its Hellfire missiles, to enhance close-air support and situational awareness. Here's the catch: there was only room in the nose for one system. If they added the Marines' preferred electro-optical infrared and night vision systems, the radar the Navy wanted would have nowhere to go, so they would have to mount it on top of the main rotor. This dilemma eventually led to the design of the AH-64D Apache longbow, which integrated both capabilities. Additionally, while the Marine Corps wanted to keep the Hellfire missile, it was an Army-specific weapon at the time, and neither the Navy nor the Marines had access to it. This posed a logistics problem, so Hughes came up with a workaround. Instead of Hellfire, the Sea Apache could carry 2 4-tube tow missile launchers, just like the AH-1W Super Cobra. This way, the Marines could still get the firepower they needed, and the Navy could fit the radar they wanted. Though not ideal, the Marines were willing to go along with this compromise. But just when it seemed like everything was falling into place, the Navy changed its mind again. With President Reagan pushing for increased military spending and more funds available for the Navy, the higher-ups wanted to add more capability to the Sea Apache. Now, they wanted a helicopter that could not only escort amphibious assault ships, but also carry Harpoon missiles for anti-ship missions. It would need to be capable of air-to-air combat with Sidewinder missiles, support Navy SEAL operations, carry out reconnaissance and surveillance, and even conduct beyond visual range strikes against enemy fleets. The Sea Apache's role had become even more complicated. It was supposed to be a Swiss Army knife of a helicopter, doing everything from air defense to anti-ship strikes, to reconnaissance and beyond. McDonnell Douglas engineers didn't get to enjoy their brief sense of accomplishment for long before the Navy threw a curveball that left them scratching their heads. Wait, are you guys asking us to grant wishes here? We're a defense contractor, not a magic genie. The Navy's demands were so unrealistic, the engineers jokingly thought. With this many tasks crammed into one helicopter, you might as well forget about building aircraft carriers. Just make 10,000 Apaches and bury the Soviets in them. But the Navy wasn't done yet. Just as the engineers were still reeling from the initial request, the Marine Corps popped in, asking, "So when can we expect our Sea Apaches?" The engineers replied, "Well, we can't deliver that. Maybe ask your buddies in the Navy. They seem to be calling the shots now." The Marine Corps representative took a look at the feedback form and nearly lost it. "So, you guys have been asking for everything under the sun and haven't even thought about our needs? Not only do you want it to be capable of anti-ship and air-to-air combat, but have you considered our specific requests? When our Marines are storming the beach, what are you going to do? Just give us harpoons. That's it." And let's be honest, the Apache was a beast, but it was still a helicopter. Even with all the modifications, how was it going to compete with fixed-wing aircraft? If it ran into enemy jets, wouldn't the Navy's FA-18 on the carrier deck have to handle air superiority? Did anyone even ask them if they were okay with that? The debate between the Navy and Marine Corps turned into a full-blown standoff, dragging on for years. By 1989, the two sides finally reached a compromise and agreed on the Sea Apache's conceptual design. If they had enough funding, they could start building the prototype. But just as things were looking like they might move forward, more problems popped up. After all the back and forth between the Navy and Marines, the Sea Apache had become almost unrecognizable compared to the original Apache. Sure, it retained some parts from the original design, but to meet the Navy's sky-high requirements for naval air superiority, the electronic and weapon systems had been almost completely redesigned, and the technical specs were through the roof. Even if it could be made, the cost to develop it and the price per unit would skyrocket. Around this time, the Soviet Union was on its last legs. Once it collapsed, there was no way Congress would keep throwing money at military projects. The Navy started to tighten its belt, and once again, there was infighting over how the development costs should be split between the Navy and the Marine Corps. The Marines, at this point, were furious. "Are you kidding? This was your idea to begin with, and now you're asking us to cover the bill." As the Navy and Marine Corps passed the buck back and forth, the Soviet Union crumbled, and without the looming threat, the funding evaporated. The Sea Apache was officially scrapped. Today, the Marine Corps is still using the AH-1Z Viper, an upgraded version of the original AH-1 Cobra. While it's a capable helicopter, it's still a step below the Apache. Even though the Sea Apache project ended in failure, the idea of Navy and Marine Corps helicopters never went away. In fact, the UK has now deployed Apache helicopters on its amphibious assault ships. Though they're mostly stock versions with minimal modification, in a way, they're a kind of Sea Apache in their own right.